All right, guys, welcome to the Fuel for Life. I'm so excited to be back in podcasting and interviewing amazing, incredible people who are just world changers, who are not indifferent to the call that God has given them in their life. And so today, before you will hear from my current guest, I'd like to share a little bit about him. Today we have with us Pastor Gheorghe Rosca. He is the founding board member of an organization called Protect Our Kids, protectourkidsnow.org online. Pastor Gheorghe is the 8th of 12 children born in Romania under the communist regime of George, help me pronounce this.
Nicolae Ceausescu.
So his family immigrated to the States legally. Okay, I just want to make sure everybody understands that legally. In 1991, he grew up in Southern California. He lives in Orange with his wife and 4 children. And he holds a bachelor's in civil engineering, which, by the way, you and I both do, actually, which is kind of crazy. We'll talk about that later. And an MBA with an emphasis in project management from California Polytechnic, Cal Poly?
So it's Cal Poly Pomona, my civil undergrad, and then from Keller University, my MBA.
Okay, so George is a founding member of the Protect Our Kids organization, and he is passionate about protecting the freedoms granted in the Constitution that are aligned with the values of the founding fathers for future generations. This is incredible. So I'm going to say one more thing before I'm going to let you speak and talk about yourself and about your organization, because this is so incredibly fascinating. So I think about 7 or 8 months ago, one of my friends that I grew up with here in Southern California, we did youth ministry together. We did different kind of events together. We served together. He reached out to me on Facebook completely randomly after he saw some of my posts. He kind of knows what I'm all about. And he's like, hey, there's this guy in Southern California. You absolutely need to connect with him. His name is George. Like, you guys would really, really, really get along. And you just got to connect with him. So I'm like, yeah, sure. I love connecting with new people. And so he texted me, I believe, your number. And we connected. You came, first time we met, you came here to our church. And like, we talked for like an hour and a half. And we were like, we can talk for another couple of years and it wouldn't be enough. And immediately I felt like we aligned so well with our value, with our conservative values, with Christ-centeredness, the fact that you have planted a church before, you have that experience, you're a pastor, and you come from basically the former Soviet Union. And so after you told me all this and we kind of started talking, then you told me about Protect Our Kids, and I was like, this is incredible. So this is you'll find out I'm a bit long-winded, but I really want you to talk about some stuff that I'm going to ask you about. So Fuel for Life Nation, please welcome Pastor Gheorghe Rosca.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, Bogdan. As you mentioned, when we first met, I felt like we were, a brother from another mother, right?
That's right. Yep.
It's like we came from the same part of the world. We had to deal with similar life-changing experiences moving to the United States.
Yep.
The whole culture, adaptation, being also that what I would say is that binding generation between our parents and between our children who are, American Romanians, or American Ukrainians or American Russians.
That's right.
So I feel like our generation has had to learn so much from the old and from the new and make it all stick together.
Yes, exactly. So I want you to begin with where you were born and explain about Romania, because a lot of people in the United States, they don't know where Romania is, or is it a Slavic country? Do they speak Russian? Can you give us a background? Because it's sometimes people are confused. We want to make sure people understand.
Well, first of all, it's not Armenia. Okay, for people out there, because that's the very first thing people always say. You're from Armenia? I'm like, no, Romania.
And
Romania is in Eastern Europe. We are southwest of Ukraine.
Okay.
We share a border with the Black Sea.
Okay.
Then to the north and to the west, we have Hungary. We have then south Serbia and Bulgaria.
Okay.
So we're surrounded by 4 or 5 nations with the Republic of Moldova as well.
Okay. And was Romania part of the former Soviet Union?
Romania, yes, is east of Germany. So from Eastern Germany, go back towards the east, towards Russia. That's all part of the former Soviet bloc.
Okay. Okay.
And so post World War II, 1947 actually, was when communism fully took effect in Romania. I remember talking to my grandpa. He's like, one day they just came and they took away all of my property. Everything, the house that he had built with his dad was no longer his house. He lived in it. He got to live in it, but it became the government's property. The farm that he had farmed for, he was born in 1914, so 1947, we're talking about 33 years later, right? Wow. So a 33-year-old man, 5 years younger than I am right now, to be taken everything away from you, everything your parents gave you, your grandparents gave you, everything that they worked so hard for.
And the government took this away.
The government took it away. So Gheorghe Rosca, who was the leader at that time, he was basically a Russian proxy. He was installed by the Russian, post World War II Stalin government, and he was in power for I think a little over a decade, and then a younger leader kind of emerged, and that was Nicolae Ceausescu. And from the late 50s, early 60s, he took over, and he kind of wanted to be himself. He didn't want to just be a Russian proxy.
Okay.
So he took matters into his own hands to kind of establish that dominance. And that's when we got to see communism go not just from, taking everything from everyone, but starting to persecute Christians in particular.
Wow. So your family, how many generations are they Christians? Like, in what line did that start in?
So it started on my grandparents' side, on both sides.
Okay.
Yeah. So the evangelicals in Romania, the Baptist missionaries first came there in the late 1800s.
Okay.
And then I don't know if you're familiar with the Azusa Pacific Revival, Azusa Street
LA.
Revival in LA.
Yes.
So that was kind of the Pentecostal a movement that started. That made its way very quickly into Romania as well, because there was actually Romanian people who were here, part of that.
Okay.
Happened to be here.
Okay.
And they went back home and they brought the gospel along with with them. So the Romanian Pentecostal Church technically just celebrated last year its 100-year anniversary. So 1922 was the very first Romanian Pentecostal church in Arad.
So what city in Romania were you born in?
So I wasn't born in a city.
Okay.
The biggest city close by to us was about 60 kilometers away.
Okay.
And that's called Timișoara.
Okay.
And Timișoara is in the top 3 large cities in Romania.
Okay.
Bucharest is the capital, over 1 million people. And then I think right now it's Cluj and Timișoara, who are like 2 and 3.
So tell me again, how many brothers and sisters you have?
Yeah, so I have 8 sisters and 3 brothers.
How in the world was that growing up? Like,
well, 5 of those sisters are older than me.
Okay.
So I felt like I've grown up with 6 moms.
Wow.
My mom and my 5 sisters.
Interesting. Okay.
And then we grew up in a very small town. So I mentioned 60 kilometers outside of Timișoara, no running water, rarely any electricity, no telephone, no car. A little village of maybe about 300 people.
Wow.
We had our well where we got our water from. We had a tiny 2-bedroom house where we all slept in. And
You remember all of this?
I remember all of this.
So how old were you when you came to the States?
It's just before my 7th birthday.
So you went from living in a place where you got water from a well, and you moved to America. Where did you land when you guys came to America?
LAX.
Okay, so that was a bit different then.
Oh my goodness. I could still remember when we got onto the 405 freeway.
Yep.
And seeing 4 lanes in each direction. I was like, what are these roads? Like, I was coming from dirt streets.
Wow.
Okay. in Romania with horses and buggies on them.
Right.
We didn't own a car. Maybe there were a couple people in the town that had a car. But that was pretty much it. So seeing a car, let alone a helicopter or an airplane in my life by the time I turned 7, it was, unheard of.
And you mentioned in your bio on the Protect Our Kids, this organization, that you guys immigrated to the States legally. And can you tell me about that? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, so that happened as a result of some severe persecution that my parents had to go through.
Okay.
So my dad was part of the Communist Youth Party. He's the oldest of 10 in his family.
Wow. Did he wear the little red deal around his neck?
He had everything growing up through school.
Wow.
The communists wanted to kind of raise leaders in all areas of culture and society. So he was a singer. And so he was being groomed to be part of the music culture of Romania.
Okay.
Obviously, my grandparents were believers. They raised him in the church, but he had his moments of, running away, being rebellious. And the Lord worked miraculously in his heart so that at the age of 18, he suffered a massive accident at work.
Wow.
He was a lathe machinist. The press that clamped onto the metal pieces where they would be doing their work, in fact, clamped down all 8 of his fingers.
Oh, my goodness.
And so this is 1969, Romania. Hospital system is, horrible.
Yeah.
You have nothing compared to what you have here in the United States. So the doctors just bandaged him up, sent him home, said, son, you're losing all fingers. We have nothing. There's nothing we could do for you. So that was his moment of desperation, and he cried out to the Lord, and he said, Lord, if you give me back my fingers, I promise that the rest of my life I will sing only for you.
Wow.
And for 3 months, my grandma, his mom, had to bathe him, clothe him, feed him, wipe his rear end, go into the restroom because he was stuck like this because of all the pressure going through. Well, the Lord kept his end of the bargain. He got to keep all of his fingers.
Wow, praise God.
And so he gave his life to the Lord. Now, what that meant for him, though, was that because he was involved in the Communist Party, because he was marked as a future leader, he was on a watch list because they obviously didn't like Christians.
Wow.
So in 6 years later, 1975, he got his first fine for singing church hymns on his front porch.
Wow.
Then he got fined again multiple times between 1975 and 1982 until one day in 1982 on my mom's 30th birthday, he doesn't come home. He was used to being randomly picked up off the street by the secret police, taken into interrogation rooms, and constantly being asked, where are you going to church? Who are the new converts? What are the pastors preaching about? Are they saying anything that's anti-government? And so he would never divulge any of those, requests of theirs. So finally, they got fed up with him, so they put him in prison in 1982.
Wow.
He spent a month in prison and then 6 more months on house arrest.
Wow.
And following that experience, he decided that, you know what, this isn't a place that I want to raise my kids in. So he kept on looking for opportunities to get out of the country.
Okay.
From 1978, I mentioned that he's the oldest of 10. So different uncles started to escape. They were able to escape out of Romania. It was a closed border, so you were shot on sight if you were found
Wow.
trying to
Yeah.
escape. And so in 1988, my dad applied for a program as political refugees under the Reagan administration. And we were able to, through that program, be accepted and get a visa to come over. And we weren't able to make it here until September of 1991. It just took a long time.
And that seems like that that late 80s, early 90s, that was like that particular wave of immigration with refugees. Because my family came in 1992 to the United States. We landed first into Seattle. So that's similar. So fast forward to Protect Our Kids, this organization, right? You guys are in America. Did you guys immediately assimilate to the culture? Like because you're like, how old are you when you came to America then? You're like 7.
Yeah.
So you obviously, and you speak Romanian still.
I do.
You not only speak Romanian, you speak multiple other languages.
My mom's from Slovakia. My dad's from Romania. I grew up most of my life now here in America, so I had to learn English. But then a lot of my friends from school and the neighborhoods, the poor neighborhoods we grew up in, were heavily Latino. And then through the church plant that I was part of, we also then planted a church in Mexico.
Wow.
So I've had to learn Spanish as well.
All of this is extremely fascinating. It's so fascinating because I didn't know there's more people like me out there who had this like background of like you live in Russia, you experience religious persecution, or you live in the former Soviet Union. So like when you grew up in your home, like church, that wasn't an option. That was like, you have to go.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
it wasn't like the parents were like, well, kids, what are you going to do? What do you want to do on Sunday? It was like how many services would you guys go to on Sunday? Like all day long?
2. It was 2, but they were 2 long services.
Exactly.
In the morning from 9 to 12 and in the afternoon from 6 to 8.
Right. And so it's like you guys were just being shuttled by your parents to church, right? And it was a normal thing. So do you feel like looking back hindsight now, you're a husband, you're a father, you're a pastor, like you have all this experience. Do you feel like your particular upbringing that many people would call very conservative, very fundamentalist, very much like, why would you go to church for 7 hours on a Sunday? Do you feel like it actually was good? Like, are you happy you had that, or you feel like you missed out on life in some capacity?
I'm very blessed to have had that opportunity. Because what most people don't realize, and having been in corporate America now for the last 17 years as well, is you see people who reach a certain point in life, typically their second or third year into their careers, and they're 24, 25 years old, and they've grown up in a non-religious home, never been to church. They've probably done soccer, basketball, pee-wee football growing up, karate, taekwondo, piano lessons, like all of that, right? And then they wake up one day at 24, 25 years old and saying, what is my purpose in life? They've never asked themselves the biggest questions in life. What I love about the way that our parents did it with us is we were confronted with the biggest questions of life from the very beginning, as long as I've known myself. So going to church, reading the Bible, going to funerals. In fact, one of the things that I just found like shocking that, most people my age here and our age in America, maybe they've been to 5 funerals their entire life.
Yeah.
Well, by the time I was 18, I think I'd been at 100 funerals.
Wow.
And that's just because within that church community, you are like a family. Your grandparent, your friend's grandparents, your friend's uncles, your own grandparents, your own, aunts and uncles, whoever's going through that, you are there.
Yes.
And you are constantly brought about and reminded of your humanity.
So good. And what you're saying, like, this is something that as I get older, I'm focusing on more and more. Like, we have a responsibility. We did not simply, God didn't just bring us to America just to open a business and go to 3 vacations a year and drive a nice car or whatever. That is, even though that's even more than the American dream, there's a reason why there are so many immigrants in America. And like whenever I'm hanging out with like my nieces or nephews, I am never missing this opportunity to like download to them this knowledge, how important church is, how important faith is, because we are now that generation that is supposed to pass the baton of faith to the younger people. That's pretty much, we're both not even that old. We're still very young, but we, so this kind of like this dynamic, this non-individualism, this community or community effort of like, okay, who's in trouble? Who needs help? Let's pray for people. Let's put people back on the right track. I think that is vastly often missing from American churches, where it is so individualistic, where I'm going to take care of my own family. I'm going to figure out my needs. It doesn't matter what else is going on. But you've been able to hold that, and now you're doing it with your family, with your church. So I want you to introduce to us this organization, Protect Our Kids. Like how did it come about? Like what was why did you get motivated to do it? Because most people that are young, that are highly educated, that are successful in their lines of business or in their corporate world, they have no interest to try to help society in a capacity to explain a worldview that is biblical and Christ-centered. Why in the world did this interest you, and how did this come about?
So, April 2018, my wife, who's also from Romania, at this time we had just had our third child, and it was my one and only girl. My wife sends me an article, and she follows a blogger mom out of the Pacific Northwest. Her name is Heidi St. John. And she posted an article called The National Sex Ed Sit-Out Day. And she read it, she sent it to me, and she's like, hey, George, you grew up here in America, you've been through the public school system, read this article, I have no clue what's going on. You make sense of it. So I got home that night after I put the kids to bed. I read it, and I was like, my goodness, I'm 33. I just graduated from high school 15 years ago. What in the world's going on? Like, it caught me by surprise. I was shocked. And so for the next 3 weeks, I spent every night after I put the kids to bed reading, researching, trying to figure out what is this thing called comprehensive sexuality education. And that's when I started to uncover the history of sex education, which is always about biology and anatomy. And in some states, it was also about the HIV and AIDS and STDs. Well, now they have redefined all of those terms, come to find out, and that in 2018, in April, while I was researching this, the reason why it started to surface was because in 2015 in California, a law passed called the California Healthy Youth Act, which we're going to talk a lot about language and about deception of language and about redefining words that people are used to, right? So when you hear the California Healthy Youth Act, I would have never read that title and thought sex education, right? So the left is very good at just creating this facade of words. Positivity, right? Positive words. So I'm like, okay, what do I do? Like, what can I do about this? Because this makes me sick to my stomach. And I'm like, I never had to deal with that. So I'm the 8th of 12 in my family, but I'm smack in the middle in terms of age. So I have my oldest sister is 11 and a half years older than me. My youngest sister is 11 and a half years younger than me. And so I called up my younger sister and I'm like, hey, you just, finished high school 4 years ago. What kind of sex education did you deal with, And so she tells me, I tell her about what I've been researching, and she's like, yeah, maybe a little bit of that, but not much that she had to deal with. And I'm like, okay, I have to figure this out. So 3 weeks later, I went to my very first school board meeting. And it was, in fact, here in Orange County. It was the Orange County Department of Education, which oversees the 28 school districts in the county of Orange. So they have about 450,000 students under their purview.
Wow. Okay.
And it just so happened to be that on their board agenda was the California Healthy Youth Act as a discussion item. And the reason why it was a discussion item is because every public board has a legal counsel. And their legal counsel had just published a 4-page memo explaining how the California Healthy Youth Act, in fact, should be applied. And one of the things that he mentioned in that memo was that parents can no longer opt out their children from sex education.
And before they were able to.
Before they were able to. Well, I had spent the last 3 weeks reading the law and doing all of my research. And in fact, the law to me, and I'm no lawyer, but I can understand English. The law to me was still pretty clear that you can opt out. So I'm like, how could this lawyer think this way? Let me go there. Let me do a 3-minute public comment. And from my corporate background, I deal a lot with cities, counties, state governments. So I had the advantage of understanding how public boards work, how agendas are published, how the meetings are run. So I went there and I wrote my 3-minute speech. I went up and I gave the speech, and come to find out at that meeting that there were around 20 other parents who were just like me, doing their own research, finding out about what's happening. And kind of 2 things happened as a result of that meeting. Number one, I got to network with some of those parents. And with 2 of those parents, we started a Facebook group called Informed Parents of California.
Okay.
And that exploded. In 6 months, it went from the 3 of us to 30,000 people in that Facebook group. But another thing happened, and there was actually another Romanian person there in that meeting, and this lady actually videotaped my speech, and she put it on Facebook, and it went semi-viral.
Nice.
And I started getting messages from all over the country of people saying, hey, great speech. What can I do to support you, your organization? Like, you're out there fighting. And I'm like, I have no clue what I'm doing. I just went. I gave my first speech at a school board meeting, you know? So I started researching, like, who is out there doing this work?
Right.
I couldn't find anybody. And usually, whenever you're in that kind of situation where you can't find somebody doing something, the Lord's kind of like zeroing in and saying, George, I think you're not, hint, okay?
Yep, it's you. Yep.
So I kept on pushing that out. So I got very involved with the Informed Parents of California. I'm like, okay, here's a Facebook group that we can grow, that we can share and spread information about. And then that same year in 2018, I met Pastor Jim Doman. He was the lead pastor of a church network here in California called Church United. And it's a pastors network. He had, at that time, it was over 700 pastors. And I told him, I said, Pastor Jim, look what I'm dealing with, and I'm new to all of this. I think we need to inform all the pastors of churches and like go into their churches and do little conferences. And so in April of 2019, we did that. We said, okay, you know what? Let's do a pilot run. We chose 3 churches here in Southern California, one in Orange County, one in the Inland Empire, one in LA County. We went and we did in April and May of 2019, we held 3 conferences. We had over 700 parents show up at each of those churches.
Wow.
We did 3-hour-long conferences, and then we would spend another 2 hours afterwards doing Q&A.
Right.
Parents just were shocked at what we were divulging.
Which is public.
It's all public.
It's not like the parents they could know about it if they wanted to.
Correct. But they didn't know that this was happening under their nose.
At the schools where their children are going to school getting educated or indoctrinated.
Exactly.
Okay, so keep going. Yes. Yeah.
That's when, after those first 3 conferences, we were like, okay, we are scratching an itch here.
Yep.
We're onto something. initially we started Protect Our Kids as a project of Church United.
Okay.
Under Pastor Jim Doman.
Right. Under that church network.
Correct.
Yep.
Pastor Jim said, guys, this is like its own thing. So Mark Schneider and I, who had kind of been spearheading that initiative, he said, you have my blessing. Go and spin this off. Make it its own thing.
Okay.
And so we kept on doing those conferences, and throughout the rest of 2019 up until COVID shut us down in March of 2022, we had done 13 conferences at churches up and down California.
And what was the like the purpose of the conference? Like
raising awareness.
Okay.
Informing and educating parents.
Okay. Okay.
And in fact, we did one at a Ukrainian church in the Sacramento area.
Correct. Yes.
And so I had always known about the Slavic population in the Pacific Northwest, kind of down to Sacramento.
Right. That's right.
But I've never had a connection in there until now that you and I have met.
Come on, let's go.
But from there, after we did those conferences, after COVID shut us down, is when we said, you know what, we're gonna launch our own 501c3 nonprofit. So Mark and I spent the early parts of COVID, those first few months, getting organized, making sure that we're a legal entity, making sure that we have a board, a leadership team, a group of volunteers underneath us who are supporting us in our strategic initiatives. And so that's how Protect Our Kids was birthed.
So this is incredible. And I love your logo. That's immediately, it was like so eye-catching, where there's a bear.
Mama bear.
Exactly. And then there's like a cub following her with a star. And this is like obviously a play off of California.
Yeah.
What I really like about this, and what I like about just your overall spirit in the way in which you're doing it, where there are some Christians who have a scarcity mindset and they look at a mountain and they're thinking how big it is. But there are other Christians who say, well, this mountain might be big, but my God is bigger. That God is bigger, God is greater. There's no limitations for him. And this is when so many people are moving out of California or trying to say, oh, California is too liberal, it's crazy, California, whatever people say. To me, it's preposterous, because sin is so insidious that it is everywhere. You cannot escape it anywhere in America. You think the South is just a Bible Belt and everybody's Christian there? That's not really the case. So what I really, what we often talk about with Pastor Dimitri, the other pastor at Forward Church, where I'm a pastor at, is that we don't want to just talk about the doom and gloom in our society, because everybody's doing that. But we want to cast a beautiful future of what it looks like to live with Christ and to work together for the kingdom, right? So this logo, and I want you to talk about it, that instead of trying to decry California or say like, okay, we're going to move out to whatever other state, you guys used like imagery of the beautiful flag of California and incorporated it into your logo to show people that we are, maybe I should be your spokesperson, but like, to show people that like, no, we will protect our kids. So tell me about the genesis of this logo. I love it.
Yeah. So every time we speak, the logo automatically triggers people to say, oh, you're from California.
Right.
And we wanted people to also think that good things come out of California.
Exactly.
All
yes.
Right? The other thing that we've learned was that California has always been a ground zero.
Yes.
On these kind of topics.
Yes.
It's the largest state. It's also a place where the teachers union holds the most power. It's,
wow.
The supermajority within both houses in the state legislature are Democrat. So we said, you know what? We are going to be those mama bears and papa bears.
That's good.
That are going to be in front of our children.
Oh, so good.
And so we want to also, by this imagery, show parents that when you send your kids to public schools, you're actually putting the cub in front of you.
Wow.
You need to be in front of the cub.
This is so good.
So there's a lot of things within
so
that logo that really resonates. Now, ever since then, even though we started off as a California-based organization and all of our conferences started off here, everyone across America has started to read about our materials.
So good.
And so we've been now going since COVID shut us down. Our big dilemma was, how do we reach and inform parents if we can't do in-person conferences anymore? So we had to, shift and pivot towards online. And that's when the idea came to mind of, well, how do we take the information and content from our conferences and create that in bite-sized chunks for parents everywhere to understand?
Wow.
And I became very familiar by that time with PragerU.
Okay.
We all know Dennis Prager, right?
Right.
And, he innovated the whole concept of a 5-minute video.
Okay.
Right? A 5-minute video on one topic, bring an expert to be the face of that video, give them 3 things to talk about. That way the person watching the video remembers those 3 things on that one topic, and you're done. So what we did was we said, okay, we need to get a very concise message to parents. That's where we branded the whole idea of a triple threat.
Okay.
There's many things wrong with the public school system, but what are those top 3 things that are 80% of the problem?
So before we get there, this is good. This is like the ultimate point of this discussion. So we at Forward Church, we say we help people find hope in Jesus. So we have a teens group. We say we help teens find hope in Jesus. Our children, we help our children find hope in Jesus, right? We have a mission and a vision. So how would you encapsulate, like, what is your goal of this organization?
Our goal is to inform and educate parents and pastors all across America about the dangers to our children in the public school system.
Okay.
And to equip them with knowledge of what they can be doing about it.
You mentioned before that California is highly influential. So basically what California looks like is what the rest of the country will look like in maybe 5 or 10 years.
Yes.
So culture flows downstream, right? So if you want to know what the rest of America will look like, you look at California. So you guys were not indifferent to California, and you're like, if we can influence people here and have, the power of God with you, then the rest of the country can basically be influenced.
Yes.
So I want to understand, like, if I'm a parent and and my kids go to school, and let's say they're not going to private school, or they're not going to charter school, they're not going to homeschool, like, because here's the thing, like, for my particular background, like, I have 5 siblings in my family, so not as big as yours, but some people even think 5 is big. But I have 4 sisters, and I am the middle child, so I have 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters. 3 of my sisters are married, and they have kids, and every single one of my sisters homeschools their kids. So in our family, homeschooling, I was not homeschooled, but they all are, right? My sister's children all of them are homeschooled. They're all normal. They don't have any, social problems. Like they're super chill. They're relevant. They're great. Nothing, they're not turning butter in the middle of nowhere. That's not what they're doing. And even if they were doing that, that'd be kind of cool. But the point is that all of my sisters, though, are in the education field. Like 2 of them have master's degrees in education, meaning that they're able to homeschool their kids, right? And so they're doing that. So like your kids go to public school. Like when I was in public school, like it was fine. Like maybe there was like weird stuff there, but like when I never remember coming home at like 8, 9, 10 years old and trying to tell my parents, like, hey, can a man become a woman, or can a woman become a man? Like nobody even talked about that. Like so now it's a whole different ball game. What are parents supposed to do? Because the moment they go to your website and they look at all this stuff, how can they even allow their kids to go to school the next day, right? Like this is a dilemma.
Yeah, it's a huge dilemma.
Yeah.
So let's first start off by dispelling some myths.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, let's do it.
The first myth is a parent capable of educating their own child? Or is the public school system or another school system the better agent of instruction? up until the 1840s in America, compulsory education was not around, meaning most people were getting an education at home.
Up until 1840.
Up until the 1840s.
So the public school is a brand new phenomenon in some ways.
It's a brand new phenomenon in the Homo sapien, if you want to use that term, okay, in our existence. So do you know what the literacy rate prior to public schools? It was
much higher, probably.
Much higher,
of course,
than it is today.
Of course.
After 170 years of public schools, all right? And so you have to ask yourself, it's like, well, wait up. We've had qualified teachers, right, who go get their bachelor's and teaching credentials in order to be teachers in the public school system. And yet, even with all of that, okay, over 3 million... altogether, there's over nearly 5 million teachers in America. Okay, how come our students are not having a higher literacy rate today? Than that one-room schoolhouse, way back in the 1800s. So, I want every parent listening to this, podcast here today to know that they are actually more than qualified to teach their own children.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. And we have clearly demonstrated that yet again through the homeschooling movement that has taken America by storm since the 1980s, I would say, and then really, really exploded once again post-COVID.
Correct. Yep.
So we have now, on the average, a homeschooler is actually, according to all statistics of exams in whatever subject you want to go in, a homeschooler on the average far exceeds a child in public schools.
Yeah, and like what you're talking about, even though I was not homeschooled personally, like I was growing up in Seattle, like in the 1990s and early 2000s, like we went to public school, but what I remember from our public school system was that they offered, like you're talking about accelerated learning and like the kids doing much better. I remember we had an offering at our local community college. It was called Running Start. So you can take the last 2 classes in high school in college, and you get credit for the 2 classes in 2 years in college and the 2 years in high school. So you literally you finish high school and you get your associate's degree at the same time.
Yep.
And to me, it was so normal to do that. I'm like, of course, it's accelerated learning. And it baffled me at what I was like 16, 17 years old when all of my friends were like, oh no, you're going to miss the high school experience. You're going to miss prom. You're going to miss hanging out with your friends. I'm like, what's the point of that? I'm like, the point, at least the way in which I was brought up in a Christian, now fundamentalist household, which I think is a very good thing. It was like, go to school, go to church, read your Bible, pray, repent of your sin, get married as soon as you possibly can. Do not move out of your house prior to getting married. Only move out when you get married. And when you get married, that's someone that's a Christian, and then make sure you're part of a local church and just do that for the rest of your life. And to me, it's so natural. It's so normal, right?
Yes.
And then the homeschool bit, which I want you to continue talking about, which is so crazy, is that when my sisters began to do homeschooling and that movement began to like somewhat take off, like 2014, 2015, 2016, everybody thought it was like, we're talking about like bonnets and turning butter and like, they're like, there's no Wi-Fi and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, that's normal. But then during COVID, everybody's like, oh, homeschooling, that's a really cool idea. So the thing that was not cool anymore became in vogue, became cool now. And then ultimately, no matter what people thought about homeschool, in a way, everybody actually became to be homeschooled because you had to be at home.
Exactly. And so let's continue that dilemma, right?
Yes.
Because our message, our message is get out now.
Yes.
And so we've already, I hope I've just encouraged parents.
Yes.
With the literacy rates, pre-compulsion education.
Yep.
With the very current, over the last 40 years, homeschooling movement. And so the dilemma, especially in your blue states, right? Very high tax states.
Yep.
Very high cost of living states. George, we have 2 kids. Both of us work. We can't homeschool. Or George, both of us work to barely make ends meet. We can't afford a private school for our child, right? What do we do? So I understand all of those dilemmas because I had to work through that logic myself, even while being part of Protect Our Kids. I have 4 kids. I cannot afford in Southern California 4 private school tuitions. But, be incremental about it and be strategic about it. You can't afford 4. Can you afford 1? Mm-hmm. Okay, who's your most vulnerable child?
Oh,
protect that child.
There you
Start
go.
with that one.
Okay.
So right now we've incrementally reached the point to where we have 3 of our kids in private school, and only my oldest is in public school, because I know that with him, he's at a point where he understands a lot more. I can have those conversations. I can be discipling him actively. Not that I don't do that with my younger 3, but they just don't have the capacity from their human brain development yet to deal with these issues. And so he is one that I know that I can still continue to protect. Obviously, even with everything that I am taking, the most important thing to do is to pray for them. Because just like my parents brought us over here, and all of us kids went straight into public school because we had no clue how the system worked. And my mom couldn't homeschool all of us either.
That'd be a whole community right there.
Exactly. But what I've learned from my parents is that they prayed for us every day. Lord, they're going to school. Protect their minds.
Yes.
Guard their hearts.
Yes.
And every day we came home, my mom talked to all of us.
So good.
She would she wanted to know all about our day.
Yep.
She put a meal in front of us.
That's right.
And around the table we would talk. And if anything happened at school, she would find out in those conversations.
Yes. Yep.
And so I think we have to be very wise as parents. God understands our predicament, and where we are unable, He steps in.
Come on.
But where He has given us an out, a lifeboat, He expects us to take it.
So fire. That'll preach.
One of the things that I was dealing with, because I was kind of on the other extreme, I'm like, why not have my kids in the public school? I mean, they could be a light. They could be the missionaries to their friends and their peer group, right? But I read a book called Get Out Now. And 2 moms wrote that book, highly educated moms. And they documented over the last 50 years all the things that have been tried to reform public schools. Because some parents said, well, if we do this and that, 5 years from now, it'll be better. And 10 years from now, it'll be even better. So why take out my kids? Okay. Every one of those ideas has failed, but not just like partially, miserably. So when they had looked at the whole school system as a whole, they said, you know what? It's irredeemable. So we need to get our children out now. But there's a quote that we use from their book because it's so powerful, and this is what struck me and made me change my thinking. And they said this: we send missionaries to cannibals. We don't feed them our children.
Wow. Because
in the spiritual realm, right, we equip missionaries to go out and be the light. We don't send children out to preach the gospel to cannibals.
That's right.
We send fully equipped, spiritually mature adults.
Yes.
And when I read that, I'm like, okay, I've been thinking about this all wrong, because I was paralleling it with our Soviet bloc experience. My dad and all of his siblings, 10 of them, right? They grew up in a Christian household. Even though they had their rebellious stage, they all were believers. Yet they were all forced to go to the government-run school because there was no other option.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And so I'm like, well, if God protected them, He'll protect my kids here. But after thinking through the entire logic, I was like, ooh, the lifeboat. There was no lifeboat under communism. The only option was government-run schools. And so my grandparents, their only option was pray. My option is more than just pray. I have homeschooling. I have private schooling. I have co-ops. I have all these hybrid models that are out there. I have tens of options. And that's when the Lord really struck me. He said, you know what, George, you've been thinking about this all wrong. You need to take a whole different approach here because I've given you some freedoms in America that your parents never had in Romania.
Wow. So good. When you talk about the way you were brought up and the way you were raised, I feel like we were raised in the same house, like a lot of the things that you're talking about. So this concept of triple threat, you guys did a very good job of synthesizing the issues. Are these particular items in California only?
All of them, and they're spreading all across the country.
Okay. After we met, part of our church, like when we're doing like a teens group or I'm talking to church members in the lobby, I'm praying for people, I've begun to ask the kids and the teens about these things. Like the ones that are like older. Like I'm like, hey, what are they teaching you in school? And I basically said, I'm like, was there ever a moment when somebody was trying to argue with you and tell you that like a man can become a woman can become a man? And so far, I have not had anybody tell me that is happening. And then I talk to other people and they're like, well, the teachers that we have in the school, they're either Christians or they are conservative, and we are watching very closely. And so I'm hearing all these things, right? But then just a couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with somebody who works at a charter school, and I immediately was talking to this person, and I was like thinking like, okay, well, we're going to talk about, Protect Our Kids organization, like what are the things that are happening? And then she began to tell me that the staff in this school are making concessions for like a transgender student to use the staff bathroom, not even the regular student's bathroom. And I was like, wait a minute. So hold on a second. There is something happening here. Like just because we don't see it, or like, let's say our kids or like the kids that are coming to church have not experienced this, it's happening.
Well, not just that. Okay. You and I are here in Orange County.
Yep.
Okay. It was always a red county.
Yep.
All right. Very purple now.
Republican bubble.
Yeah.
Yes.
But very purple now. But we are in the city of Irvine, within the Irvine School District. Okay. This is the only school district that has had increasing enrollment. All of the other 27 have had decreasing enrollment now for well over a decade.
Okay.
Why is everybody flocking to Irvine? Great schools, great teachers. Okay. We have just found out over the last month that even within a great district like the Irvine School District, they have now had over 100 secret gender transition plans for students.
Plans.
That means,
what does it mean, plans?
So what does this mean? That means anytime a student is coming out as being transgender and they don't want their parents to know, teachers have been trained by the state of California to understand how to help them with their gender transitions. And there is a plan, there's a playbook that they follow. So there have been 100 of those students documented, of those kind of plans, because one plan per student, where everything starts off by, oh, you don't want to use that name? Okay, you can use this name. So while they're at school, their teacher talks to them with that name. Whenever they call home, they use their real name. So all of these plans for initial social transition, which then turns into surgical transition later on down the road, that's in place currently here in Irvine Unified School District.
So this is the question that immediately comes to my mind as a pastor. And we're talking about Irvine, we're talking about Orange County. We have a deep love for people and a deep love for God. And we want to be a church where people find hope in Christ. We want Christ formed in our people. Like, first, how can we equip the parents because this sounds like from some sort of like a dystopian horror film that these things are happening, but they're happening now. So the question is, how do we speak to parents? How do we inform, educate the parents to make sure that all of this is happening? And at the same time, like the teens, the people, like I'm not sure what the age group is that this can happen in what schools we're talking about. But we do believe that what we want to say is like, God is not wanting to change your gender. He wants to change your mind. It's not about changing your gender. It's about renewing your mind, right? So how can we as a church be a place where people feel free to come here to listen to the gospel? We truly believe the word of God changes people, right? So how do we deal with that? How do we like pastorally approach this highly sensitive subject?
Yeah, first of all, you have to equip them with the truth. So they need to understand what they're up against. And that's why we developed this whole triple threat approach of synthesizing the data and what's happening out there.
So let's talk about that. So let's go into triple threat.
All right. So the first one is sex and gender theory. And that one is exhibited through comprehensive sexuality education. So in the past, you had sex education, which you took once in junior high and once in high school. Mm-hmm. In 2015, the California Healthy Youth Act now mandated comprehensive sexuality education to be taught instead of sex education. Now, that sounds awfully similar, okay? But what we have found out is that the word sexuality, let me ask you, what do you think the word sexuality means? Because I'm sure you don't know, but what would you think? You're a normal person who have never heard this before. What do you think the word sexuality is defined as?
Sexuality is like you're a man or you're a woman or something that has to do with sex, basically.
Basically, yeah. So that's wrong. Because back in 2006, Planned Parenthood petitioned the World Health Organization to change the definition of the word sexuality. So sex means your biological sex, but sexuality no longer means an expression of your biological sex. But now it means that it's your sex, your gender identity, your gender expression, your thoughts, fantasies, actions, your perversions, your everything. It's like a paragraph-long definition.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, when you read the law that says comprehensive sexuality education is being mandated, I thought just like you when I read that in April 2018. I'm like, okay, they're just using a different, form of the word sex.
Yep.
But they've redefined the word in its entirety. Right after they did that in 2006, Planned Parenthood published the International Technical Guidance on Comprehensive Sexuality Education. So it's a guideline on what do they mean when they say you have to teach comprehensive sexuality education, right? Coming back to words, comprehensive. It's like, whoa, I don't want to teach my kids limited sexuality education. Of course, I want to do it comprehensively, right? So they use these very positive words. So what they mean by that is that, well, you need to talk about LGBTQ, you need to talk about abortion, you need to talk about STDs, but not just mention them, but you have to celebrate them. You have everything always has to be presented in a positive light. It cannot be discriminatory in nature. 2 years later, Planned Parenthood published the Sexual Rights Declaration, a very demonic declaration. I believe the devil always likes to copy God.
Yeah,
so just like there are 10 commandments in Scripture, there are 10 commandments in the sexual rights. There are 10 declarations, all right? Things like we all have a right to sex work. What is sex work?
And this is being taught in school.
Well, I'll get to that, right? So Planned Parenthood, what is sex work? Sex work is just a euphemism for prostitution.
Right.
Okay, so Planned Parenthood set the framework and the foundation for all of this. They petitioned the World Health Organization and the United Nations Education and Scientific and Cultural Council, and now they have all of the experts on their side, and they're going to now attack all over the world. So in America, they strategically attacked California first because they had this state already with the teachers union grasp of the legislature. So they mandated this in 2015, all right? So all of a sudden, it takes some time, the public education system is a monstrosity. It's a behemoth, right?
Yep.
Things don't happen overnight. So in 2017 and 2018, they developed, when a law passes, it has to then work its way through the state standards, and then the state develops a framework because curricula providers need to understand, well, what do you mean by the law? Like, I have a 400-page book. How do I change? What do I change if I have to change anything within it? So the state gives you a framework to know how do you comply with that law. From a 4-page law, they developed a 700-page framework. I read it almost in its entirety. It tells you from K through 2nd grade, how do you teach a child comprehensive sexuality education? From 3rd through 5th grade, from 6th through 8th grade middle school, from 9th through 12th grade. When you read what they want to expose our children to and how they want the curriculum to change to be in compliance with the law says that you must teach it in middle school and high school, but you may teach it from kindergarten through 6th grade in elementary school. Now, basically, you've given every principal out there the green light to do whatever they want.
Wow.
And so that is what I discovered in 2018. I had read the law, the standards, the framework, and guess what? I knew that something was happening in the background, that there was already a collusion happening, because it takes a long time for curricula providers to, be able to modify their curriculum, their books. Well, guess what? There were already 6 pre-approved curricula providers by the time, even before the framework was actually published. I'm like, this is fishy, okay? And so what we've done is we've taken quotes out of the framework. We've taken pictures out of those curricula, and we've showed them to parents, and we have them on our website as examples for you to see. Things like, from 3rd through 5th grade, showing them books like It's Perfectly Normal, where it's pornographic visuals of children touching their genitalia. In 6th through 8th grade, they tell them in the framework that they define spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse is using rigid gender roles. So if I, as a father teaching my children at home, that there are strict gender roles, there's a gender binary, there's male and female, God created you this way, and here's what a man should do, here's what a woman should do. That, according to the state of California, which wants to become the Church of California, is telling our students and the curricula providers that in your books, that's how you're supposed to define spiritual abuse. Pastors, wake up.
Yeah.
We are already being, placed in the crosshairs by this because we preach this all the time.
Right.
This is back in 2018, the state of California put this in their framework. So this is what we're trying to tell parents. Look, it's all out there. It's happening. You can try to opt out of it, even though the law allows you. I'll give you my own personal experience. Just recently, in this last month, I opted my high schooler out of the comprehensive sexuality education that takes place in their health class. Well, guess what? That opt-out, which is done at registration, which you register your child 4 or 5 months before they start school, until now, 2 months after school started, it never made its way to the teacher. And my son comes to me, he's like, hey, Dad, I'm being made to take this module here. I had gone 4 years ago, and I reviewed that even before my son got into high school. I reviewed all the modules. I pointed out all the unscientific medical inaccuracies within the health curriculum. The school district did nothing about it. Here is my son now, 4 years later, taking those same modules because somebody forgot to send my opt-out to their teacher. This is how they get you. And they'll just play, dumb, and they'll play like, oh, it's our mistake, or it was an oversight, or blah, 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 okay? When you have assemblies, this is outside of a health class, outside of a science class where usually sex education happens. Who do they bring in? Who are the speakers? They could be LGBTQ people who are spewing out their comprehensive sexuality education worldview onto them, okay? When they have a rainy day and, it's a substitute teacher and we're going to have, video, right? What kind of movies are they putting, there to watch? What kind of books are on the bookshelf in the classroom? Starting from K all the way through the principals themselves. We have pictures of principals who on their desk have books, these horrific pornographic books, so that when a child comes in, you're expected to see, a really cool book, right? Because principals are trying to encourage reading. But in fact, activist principals are pushing this kind of stuff.
Wow.
So we can go through example after example, but this is what happens under the first threat, the sex and gender theory.
Got it. So the next two, critical race theory and social emotional learning, talk us through briefly through critical race theory and then through social emotional learning.
So critical race theory stems from a bigger worldview called critical theory. And in this worldview, which is of Marxist derivation, Marxism looked at the world and they said, well, there's a power struggle, and the power struggle is happening in the classes. So the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, the haves versus the have-nots. The haves have all the power because they hold all the economic wealth. The have-nots, they're all poor. They don't hold economic wealth, so they don't have power. Well, that's the way that Marxism was first applied. When Marxism is applied to economics, we call that communism. But what happens if you take that same idea and you expand it to everywhere else, to gender, to sex, to race, right? So now when you apply that idea, you're applying the idea of power, of haves versus have-nots, to race. So it's whites who in America hold the power versus people of color, as if white was not a color, people of color who don't have power. So it's this oppressor versus oppressed lingo that they have created. And so in critical race theory, you are taught that there is a new definition of racism. Racism is not just being prejudiced. So if I, as a Romanian, am prejudiced against other Slavic people, Russians or Ukrainians, right? Yep. So it's no longer that. I can only be considered a racist if I have prejudice plus power. If I don't hold power to exert my prejudice on you, then by the new definition of racism, I cannot be a racist. And so what we've started seeing is in schools is kids are being taught to divest themselves of privilege or of power. In Cupertino, they were given these 8 degrees of white privilege, the highest degree being white supremacy, and then the lowest degree being like white allyship, where you're allied with, the oppressive people, right? And you're divesting yourself of your privilege and of your power. So these are very harmful things that are being taught because, well, what do you say to a kid who has a black dad and a white mom, who's now in high school, who's never been introduced to this, but now post-COVID and post-George Floyd riots, all of a sudden all these schools are teaching this concept. Is he going to look at his dad and say, Mom, you're oppressing my dad? Dad, you experienced all of this oppression, from my mom and her people, right? It's junk. It doesn't make sense. It's nonsense. But these theories, which have been peddled by Marxists in America since the 50s and 60s in higher academia, all right, so in the academy, those have now finally gotten into the public school system because we've had enough generations of teachers being trained in those that now they have that critical mass within the system. So that's critical race theory. Now, teachers will say, we don't teach that stuff. No. Oh, we don't. Okay. But they teach the concept, even though they might not use the phrase critical race theory. They hide behind different phrases. Oh, we teach ethnic studies. Oh, no, we just teach culturally appropriate or culturally sensitive social studies. So they hide behind other terminology. So just like comprehensive sexuality education was mandated in California, and then it had a framework, okay, to be implemented into curriculum, critical race theory was mandated in California, but not as critical race theory, but as ethnic studies. It has its own framework, and now it's being implemented into the curricula.
So now we are on to social emotional learning. And by the way, I think the way in which you explained CRT was probably the clearest I've ever heard anyone explain it. Because usually people say this, but they don't know how to explain it correctly or the roots of it. So what is social emotional learning?
So social emotional learning was pioneered by an organization called CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning.
Who comes up with all these acronyms?
They do. And I hate it because I have to remember all of them to speak intelligently about them. But social emotional learning is actually social engineering because what they are doing, and this organization developed these concentric circles. So at the center, they have a circle, which is followed by an outer circle, another circle, another circle. So there's 5 circles. And they say that everything starts off with the school system in the way you teach your child. If you want your child to grow up socially and emotionally mature, it starts off in the school system. And I'm like, what? No, that the family's at the center. The parents are at the center. We don't show up as parents until the 3rd circle.
Okay.
And so social emotional learning is the philosophy and the pedagogy, which means the way of teaching by teachers in the public school system to bring about the values of the worldview of critical theory into the school system. Here's how it's done. Most people think like, well, George, is there like a book for that? Is there a curricula for that? Okay. It's not a curricula. This is like the culture they're creating. All right. So this is the ethos that permeates everything. It could permeate your math class. It could permeate your social studies class. It could permeate your biology class.
Wow.
Okay.
So this is basically what you're saying is that typically parents are like, well, my school where my child goes, they're not teaching sex and gender theory. They're not teaching critical race theory. They're not so dumb to the teachers or the student union, teachers unions. They're not going to be like, hey, we're going to teach your 9-year-old critical race theory. So you're basically saying that they have like all these items have leaked into the like, but are they going to get to the point where like math will not make sense? Like,
correct.
Right?
So I just pulled up on my phone this circle. All right. And here are the things that they want to teach you. They want to teach you self-management, self-awareness, responsible decision-making.
Sounds good so far.
Relationship skills, social awareness, right? Again, very positive.
Yeah.
California Healthy Youth Act.
Right.
Okay. So what is self-awareness? Oh, you're transgender. Oh, you're struggling with that. We have a social transition plan. That's how social emotional learning is exhibited.
They're not even thinking, the kids aren't even thinking about it, and they're trying to brainwash them. They are indoctrination.
Exactly. I'll give you another example. So my kids about 3 years ago, my oldest son comes to me and he's like, hey, Dad, because I've taught him all these buzzwords, so that way if the teacher says it, like he comes home, all right? So he's like, Dad, yeah, the teacher mentioned social emotional learning today. So I emailed the teacher and I said, hey, my son told me that you did some social emotional learning today. Can you please send me the lesson plan? The teacher sends me the lesson plan. Sure enough, it was 15 slide, PowerPoint. And after going through all of that, it was this, how to be nice to others.
Okay, not bad.
Okay, not bad. Well, the application of how to be nice to others was, well, if somebody comes out and says they're no longer a girl, but they're a boy, be nice to them. Respect them. Celebrate who they are. Be happy for them.
So this is what's insane to me. If somebody's asking me, they're like, when somebody's looking for a brand new church, what is it that they should be looking for? I'm like, number one, is Christ Lord in that church? Is Christ exalted? Number two, does the pastor actually open the Bible and preach from it? Because most pastors don't do that. And the guy was like, yeah, it sounds good. This is how we find a church. And so when people want to go look for a good church, they're looking for these particular things, right? So we are voluntarily sending children into a school system where its chief aim is to indoctrinate and teach false heresy, and the parents and everybody is just doing it voluntarily. Whereas we would never, ever apply that same logic to a church, for example. Like, we would not go to a cult that's a cult, or like a church that doesn't believe Jesus Christ is God or the Bible is the word of God. We immediately were like, no, we're not going to go to that church. We're not going to go there. We're not going to do that. Same with, like, for example, we might say, well, we don't go to these particular establishments because this is not what we do, right? Like I preached on Sunday where we're walking in the light, right? Paul's like, you were created for good works, so walk in them, right? Do not trespass, right? So what you're basically explaining to me is that all these things are being taught in schools in California, and they are going through all the different subjects. And for some reason, the parents are still like, sounds good, let's have the kids go there. And the number one excuse that I personally have heard is people say, well, I don't have a master's degree in education, right? So you see the conundrum that pastors and churches in general are. So thank God for you and for the organization you lead. So kind of, I guess, comment on that and continue with the social emotional learning kind of explanation.
Well, I'll maybe give some good news too here.
Yeah, come on, we need it.
Parents need good news.
Yes.
Okay. In 2018, one of the things that I researched was how many kids are in the California public school system.
Okay.
6.2 million.
Wow.
All right. My dilemma at that time was, how do I reach the parents of 6.2 million public school kids?
Right.
And I said, you know what? I need to take as many of these out. I need to rescue as many kids out of the public school system.
Yeah.
The other question that I asked myself is, how many kids can we take out in order to bankrupt the system?
Okay.
To bring it to its knees.
Okay.
Because we need full reformation.
Okay.
We need to start all over again. And in talking to people who have been in the education space for 20, 30 years, that number was somewhere between 10 to 15%. Okay, so I took the high end. I took 15%. 15% of 6.2 million is 1 million kids. I said, okay, 1 million kids. We're in October of 2023. How many kids do you think are in the public school system in California today?
No idea.
5.8.
Okay.
400,000 kids have been extracted out of California's public school system.
Okay, so you're almost at the 1 million.
We're almost halfway there.
Wow.
Okay, in 5 years.
Wow.
Okay. Now, this is good news like Tripoli. Okay, so first of all, it's good news because those 400,000 kids that have been extracted are being protected.
Yeah.
Okay. The second good news is that how many teachers are there per public school classroom? About, 1 per every 30. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do the math. How many teachers do we not need anymore?
Right.
Okay. For every child in the public school system that's extracted, we are removing around $20,000.
Where are they being extracted to? Where?
Most of them are being extracted to home schools, private schools, or have left the state into other states. It's hard to keep track of which states.
Right, of course,
okay?
yeah.
But they're being extracted. $20,000 per child times 400,000 children. Do the math. We're talking billions, okay? For every teacher that you no longer have to teach every 30 of those kids, they are paying $1,300 in teachers' union dues. There are 325,000 teachers just in the California Teachers Association. There's also another teachers union called the American Federation of Teachers, the AFT. All right, combined, they have over 400,000 members. So do the math for every teacher that you lose out of those 400,000 kids. Okay, you lose also $1,300 out of the teachers' union's coffers. In the entire America, let's just say between the NEA and the AFT, we have about 4 million teachers. They are on the average paying $1,000 per year. That means the teachers union has $4 billion per year across the country to spend. And what do they spend it on? To punch us as parents right back in the gut. Because they're using that money to fund their teachers union presidents, who they have a president that oversees every school district. That person is full-time. They don't go and teach in a, they're a full-time teachers union representative. And then a lot of the money also goes to fund political campaigns. 99.98% go to Democrats. So you could see how this mafia money scheme is working.
So the deeper you go, the darker it gets.
Yes.
Okay. So George, we're going to have you back on Fuel for Life, okay? Because there's so much more to unpack. I want to kind of close with asking you the following question. We want, in the same way that your logo is a beautiful representation of what your organization is calling people to do. Speak to the parents that are in churches right now. They have absolutely no idea what to do. Their kids are in public school. The parents love the Lord. They're doing the best they possibly can. Parents are overworked. In California, especially in Southern California, it's single mom households. It's dual income where the mom and the dad both work and the kids are in school. They might not be able to afford private school, charter school, even homeschooling curriculum might seem a bit overwhelming. Besides them going to a local church, being a part of a Christ-centered, biblically centered church, speaking with their kids, praying for their kids, what can a parent do? What should they do?
Well, I would tell them to consider thinking through very critically and logically on how they can extract their child from the public school system. Also, just because the private school next to your house might seem expensive, doesn't mean that you can't go to their principal and have a very honest conversation. Because a lot of private schools that I've talked to, principals, they have some pretty robust scholarship programs.
And then really quickly, I was like thinking, if parents think a private Christian school is expensive, how much more expensive it is for your child to be indoctrinated by these false ideologies.
Exactly.
That's even more expensive. That may cost them their life.
Yes. So go and talk to those principals.
Okay.
They are more than willing to help you out.
Okay.
And these schools, the private schools today are in a very different position than they were 5 years ago.
Okay.
5 years ago, every private school I spoke to, in California, was saying, we're barely scraping by. We have maybe 60 to 70% capacity. There's so much more that we could be doing, but parents are just not willing to pay. They can't. They can't afford it. Today, if you go and talk to those same principals, George, we're at 110% capacity. We have wait lists for students to enter. We don't know how to grow fast enough. And you can't just, build another school overnight.
Right.
So when a school is operating at that level and that kind of income is coming, you're talking about a different conversation when it comes to scholarships.
Okay, so basically parents should be like, hey, talk to the principal of the school, that's kind of what we say at church whenever we have like a conference happening or whatever, and people are like, well, we can't really afford it. We always say money should never be a problem for you.
Correct.
Like if you truly want to know more about God and you want to go to this conference or whatever, let's see what we can do.
Yeah, so I highly encourage parents to do that. Okay. I highly encourage them to look at hybrid models. There are so many new hybrid models out there for education that will work around even your work schedule.
So tell hybrid, like drill down, double click on that. What does that mean?
So post-COVID, we have a lot of work from home, right?
Okay.
So parents who used to be working are working from home now.
Yep.
They can actually do some form of homeschooling, but they obviously still have to be at their own computer, the parent, right? They're working.
Right.
But they're in the home, so their child could be at home with them. So there are all of these independent learning academies. There are all these online schooling where there are live teachers. It's not like they just press the button, and they watch a video recording. No, there's live teachers who are teaching their child while you are there working, okay? But the child's at home with you, okay? These kind of options I didn't know before COVID ever existed. Right. So there are so many more flexible ways of doing education today than there were pre-COVID.
So this is the last thing I want you to comment on, because I feel like people are going to listen to this and they're going to be like, that's great, George. It's good for you that, your kids, the younger ones, they're homeschooled, right?
They're private school.
They're private schooled, and they're like, George, you have an MBA. You can afford to put your kids in private school. Your son, or who's the oldest?
My oldest son.
Yeah, your oldest son. So he's in like high school,
he's
right?
He's in a public high school.
Yeah, so you're like, hey, he's coming to me every day. He's like literally doing like reconnaissance missions on what the schools are teaching, and he's telling you. So it's like, and people will say, I went to a public school and I turned out okay. This is going to go in one ear and out the other. What is the risk of a parent, let's say in California, allowing their kids to be in the public school? And if somebody's listening and they're not convinced of what you're describing, and we know it's not a silver bullet, there's all these other factors, we get it. What would your caution be, or maybe advice or consultation that, hey, like if you're not going to do this, I get it, pray to the Lord, figure it out yourself, it's on your own conscience, but this is what I would suggest. What would you say?
I would ask him a question. What was the worst thing ever that you saw or experienced in your public school education, right? If you go back and think through that, whatever that was, okay? And then if you ask your child, what is the worst thing they ever saw in their public school education so far? I can guarantee you it's not like 1, 2, 3 times worse. It's 1,000 times worse. And also, it's not just taking the extremes of the worst and comparing them, but now let's also compare it on the average day. What were you bombarded with when you were in public school? Okay, by the time I got into high school, on the average day, I probably saw the lesbian couple, okay, who were going at it, and they were kind of activists in the way that they were doing it, just trying to, always be kissing and hugging and intimate with each other in front of people to normalize that behavior, okay? The worst thing I had to deal with in a curriculum was a book in my AP English class in my senior year, which had a bunch of sexual scenes, even bestiality scenes in it. But that was pretty much it. That was my experience, okay? I never had to deal with questioning my gender. I never had to deal with a science professor telling me that, wait up, biology, we've taught it all wrong. That's unscientific. There's actually multiple genders out there. There's multiple sexes out there. Things that we've known since the scientific revolution, right? Truths that are true because that's reality, okay? Your child today is being confronted to say that that's no longer true, okay? transgenderism and the whole notion of transgenderism, the whole thing of white privilege and divest yourself. I mean, every step of the way, your child is dealing with existential philosophical issues that you never had to deal with. I think you're being unfair to your children when you say, hey, my public school experience wasn't bad. I think you're going to do just fine. I think you are being very unfair to your children. Rethink it.
Wow, that's good. Gheorghe, thank you very much for all the information that you shared. This is certainly not the last conversation that you and I are going to be having. Where can people find out about you, about the organization, and also all the resources that you mentioned today?
Yes, so go on our website, start off from there, protectourkidsnow.org. When you get there, you can, it'll have links to our Twitter, our Facebook, our Instagram, and our YouTube channel. We post a lot of information out there. Then under the threats, the triple threat that we mentioned, there is a threats category. You can go in and learn about these. We have short videos on each of these threats that you can go and watch and share. They're on our website. They're on our YouTube channel. We also have toolkits. And under the toolkits, there's toolkits for parents, for pastors, for teachers. Because each one of these categories of occupations or people, right, or callings, are dealing with these issues from a different angle. And so we want to equip parents, pastors, and teachers on how to deal with these issues in a way that will bring about positive change. And then lastly, what I would say is if you want to stay up to date, we also do our own podcasts on iTunes and Spotify. We put out a weekly podcast. It's called Protect Our Kids Say What? Because every time I hear something different about what's happening in public schools, that's my reaction. Say what?
That's right. That's right.
So,
Gheorghe, this is great. So we just want to tell you that we love what you're doing. We are praying for you. May God bless you and your entire organization. Thank you for what you are doing in California to protect our kids. And thank you for making Jesus known and making it so that all these things that we are at risk for here in California and beyond, we are being equipped. And so thank you for doing this, and thank you for equipping us. And I can't wait till our next conversation.
Thank you so much, Bogdan. God bless you.
Blessings to you as well.